Welcome in, everybody, to Fantasy Pros. This is the Fantasy Football Podcast. It is me, Joey P, Joe Pisapia, and today we're going to take the deep dive and a roundtable discussion about the quarterback ranks, the ECR, where our expert analysts today have some differences. And by expert analysts, I mean, of course, Derek Brown, D-Bro, the King of Bros, and one of the best rankers of quarterbacks that there is on the planet, if you go by our ECR rankings the last few years, Billy Muzio, who's the director of operations now at Player Profile and who is growing out the mountain man look. Do not adjust your YouTube. He is looking very much like Pimento from Brooklyn Nine-Nine, if you get that reference, which is great. Great character, hopefully a little bit more sensible with the rankings, but we shall see. And of course, make sure if you're listening, you also check us out on the YouTube channel because this is where the visuals are. So you're going to see all the tiers here. We're going to start with that S tier, that superlative group, run through A through F, where the guys have the rankings, where the drop-offs are, and try to figure that out. So make sure you subscribe to YouTube and click that little bell till it goes ding for notifications as well. Before we get to the quarterbacks, though, there was some big NFL news that dropped, which was Dalvin Cook no longer with the Minnesota Vikings. They officially have moved on. So now Dalvin Cook will move on somewhere else. Derek Brown, I just think it's the easy answer. I think the Dolphins held all the cards. They decided, you know what? Just go ahead and release him, and then we're going to pick him up. We're not giving you any draft picks. I just say he's going to end up in Miami. What say you?
Oh, I think he's South Beach bound, baby. I think Dalvin Cook is going to go to Miami. I think just Locke said, forget that. I don't see anybody else coming out. I know we've gotten a little bit of like news in the ether that's talking about him. Maybe he goes to Denver, but I don't see that happening, man. So yeah, put Dalvin in Miami. I've already updated my ranks. I've dropped him to, he was already like a mid RB2. I dropped him to a low end RB2 because if he ends up in Miami, you're going to look at a split situation. Is he probably getting a 50 to 60 maybe percent opportunity share? Probably, but it could also dissolve into like just a three-headed committee, and you don't know where any of these touchdowns going. I mean, let's talk about this too, Joe. Like, Dalvin was a guy I was out on to begin with because all of his numbers scream that Father Time is knocking on the door and saying, hello, are you going to answer? Because you look at all this stuff last year.
That Medea was playing Father Time.
Hey, look, I'm not in all the casting meetings. I'm just telling you the news here, Joe. So, but with Cook, second lowest breakaway percentage of his entire career last year. His yards per route run was the lowest of his career. Cook is just a guy like, look, you want to talk about even RB2s? I'll take Akers over him. I'll take Dobbins over him. I'll take a lot of these other running backs that will go in the same range, and I have no problem full fading Dalvin Cook.
All right, Billy, we don't have a landing spot yet for Dalvin Cook, but what do you see his value being? Let's say it's with the Dolphins or a team that, you know, obviously could use an upgrade at running back. Is he still mid-level RB2 for you, or is there a bigger variance there of outcomes?
Yeah, I have him as RB2 in the projections right now. I've been anticipating him to leave the team. So this is kind of baked in. The landing spot will determine the ultimate projection, though. Like if we can assume it is going to be Miami, I think that'll be good for his, red zone touches. I think it'd be a downgrade for his targets. He probably he still gets a decent amount inside the running game. I mean, I don't think he's going to see 50% plus like he has in the years of the past, but I do think he'll still be fantasy relevant. I agree with D-Bro here. He'll probably be a back end RB2. Like right now I have him at 18. He'll probably slide between 18 and 22, depending upon the landing spot.
Okay, there you have it. And we'll see if Tyler Perry might be able to play somebody else on the show today as it goes on. As we continue on for the quarterback ranks, again, if you want to follow along with us for these rankings, you can go to fantasypros.com/rankings. All the ECR rankings are up there right now. These are great discussions too. This is my favorite thing to do. We've been doing this with the running backs, the wide receivers, the tight ends, and now we've landed on the QBs because I like these discussions. When you get a bunch of smart people and myself into a room, it's good to have these conversations because that's how you start to really bounce ideas off each other when you see some drastic differences potentially. And then sometimes people make adjustments based on this. So this is a great opportunity here in June for us to start this process of getting the ranks, and then obviously everything kind of gets honed in and refined as we get to July and August. So this has been a great series. They're all up on YouTube right now. You can listen to them all wherever you get your podcast too. So it's a great situation here. Let's start with the S tier. Now, at the very top over on Fantasy Pros, it's a short list. This is the cream of the crop, as Randy Macho Man Savage would say. It's Patrick Mahomes at the top, Josh Allen at 2, Jalen Hurts at 3. That's it. That's the tier. Now, Derek, you've got Jalen Hurts at 1. You've got Lamar Jackson at 2. Patrick Mahomes, the only quarterback who threw for 5,000 yards at 3, and Josh Allen at 4. Now, I can't argue against all those guys not being S's. Of course they are. They're absolutely S-tier quarterbacks. But putting Lamar right back in here to that top tier after being a few years removed from that MVP season, talk to me about that and what that justification is, because it is a new offense. And as we've seen sometimes, it can take a while for the new offense to click with the new personnel.
I'm all in on Lamar this year. And whether you want to talk about with the new offensive system of Todd Monken, I think it's going to be fine. In all of the parts or pieces about Lamar, everything screams that he could be in store for a nuclear type of season, Joe. I mean, even if we want to talk about, and I'll get to it, what we saw when he actually had some skill players healthy around him last year, but even diving through the Monken stuff, like in 3 of his last 4 seasons as an offensive coordinator, we're talking about a guy whose offenses have been top 12 in neutral script pace. Now, you take what Lamar had been doing previously in the Greg Roman antiquated terrible system, and then we're bottom 5. So we're talking about a ton of play volume is going to be injected into this offense, and that is going to help Lamar in every form or facet, as well as, like I talked about, last year, and I know it was a really small sample, I get that, but the only time that he had competent wide receiver, and I'm talking about when Rashad Bateman was even remotely healthy, so weeks 1 through 3, where we had Bateman playing at least 60% of the snaps, Lamar was on track to just eviscerate people. And I get it was only 3 games, but it was an impressive freaking 3 games, guys. Like, at that time, Lamar was first in fantasy points per game. He was averaging 34 points per game. You look at all of his other passing numbers, and amongst 30 quarterbacks, he was 3rd in PFF passing grade. He was 1st in big-time throw rate. He was 3rd in yards per attempt. So, like, no matter what we dive through, before this passing offense became Mark Andrews and a bunch of who knows what, DeMarcus Robinsons, Tylan Wallace, James Prochet, Devin freaking Duvernay, dear Lord, before it dissolved into that, Lamar was on his way to another monstrous season. And now we're talking about Monken's going to sit here and up the play volume. Now they have OBJ. Now if Bateman's healthy. Now, oh dear Lord, they also have Zay Flowers, and they're probably going to run a lot of 11 personnel. Mm-hmm. Yes, I am all in on Lamar this year.
Now, ECR is in on him too, because he is QB4. So it's just the next tier. He's the beginning of the A tier. But Billy, you've got Lamar ranked even further down. You've got him as the quarterback 6. So Derek makes a really good case for all the positives and some of the new refresh of this Baltimore Ravens offense with personnel and with play calling. Do you see that potential in there, or are you just trying to be a little bit reserved in terms of the injuries that you've seen out of Lamar the last couple of years too, which is not to be forgotten?
So I think I agree with everything that Debro just said, and I think he brings up a lot of valid points. I think the biggest part for me is just this tier of quarterbacks. If you look at the projections, they're all just separated by like 1 or 2 fantasy points. And so at the end of the day, if you update anything else on any of these teams, and for me, that tier is Justin Herbert, Joe Burrow, Lamar Jackson. These 3 have swapped in the 4th place for me almost every update that I've done. And so it's not necessarily that I'm low on Lamar Jackson. It's just the other players that I have in the same tier that are it's so tight knit that any type of minor update changes this order. And so I agree with everything Debro said. The only thing that I am concerned about is the overall passing volume that would hold him back inside of this tier. We all know that he has the ability for a monster rushing season. I mean, he was on pace last year to smash his career record. And when we look at this offense in whole, the expected pass rate came out to be about 544 attempts. I gave them a boost in efficiency just because of the additional weapons, and I bumped that up to 573 pass attempts, which would be a career high for Lamar Jackson. I mean, we've only seen him attempt over 400 passes once in his career. And so that was in 2019. So I think that he is on track to have a career year. I like the addition of Monken. I like the additional weapons. I just have some concerns with the injury overall. I mean, he's only played 12 games in 2 years straight. So 2021, 2022, only played 12 games. He's only played a full 16 once in his entire career in 2018. That was his rookie year. And so I have some concerns about the injury, but overall, I'm very bullish on this offense. I'm very bullish on Lamar Jackson. It's just that group and tier is very tight knit.
I'm very bullish on the Philadelphia Eagles. And one of my favorite bets of the year is already Jalen Hurts for MVP. People forget that Hurts had surpassed Mahomes right before the injury. You can go check out that video on our Betting Pros YouTube channel. But Derek's got him all the way up at the top in the fantasy realm, which I understand, Billy. That's not that difficult of a case to make, especially with the Eagles being such a class above, I feel like, everybody else in the NFC. Do you think that's a reasonable rank by Derek to have Jalen be the one overall quarterback?
It's within the realm of possibilities. I don't think it's asinine to have him number one. Like I do think
QB1 in fantasy points per game last year.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's a possibility. The only thing that I have maybe doubts about is, one, the strength of schedule this year is a lot tougher than what we saw last year, which will benefit him more in the passing game than it does inside the rushing game. I also think that the addition of the running backs signal to me that they want him to run less. And so they may be a little bit more reserved in that category as well. But ultimately, it just breaks down to the consistency of Patrick Mahomes for me. And it's, how can we have a guy who threw for over 5,000 yards much lower than number one, right? Is in the last 3 years, 47-40 is the lowest passing yards that we've seen out of him. And so we've seen 38 touchdowns, 37 touchdowns, 41 touchdowns, yards per attempts of 8.1, 7.4, 8.1. And even when you take away his explosive weapon, Tyreek Hill, he still goes out and throws for 5,000 yards. And so I think regardless of what his weapons are, I think he's just that good of a quarterback to where he's going to lift and elevate the players around him. And he's going to just make sure that he's consistently inside the top. I mean, we had down the stretch where he injured that ankle where I was betting against him every single week. And he continued to prove me wrong, even on that hobbled ankle. And for me now, it's just, he's honestly one of the best quarterbacks I've ever seen. And it's hard for me to downgrade him any further than number one in the rankings.
Yeah, Mahomes is my number one too, and it's not from the consensus feel. It's from the consistency that you talk about when it comes to Mahomes. Look, I think Hurts can have a great season. There's no doubt about that. He's coming off a great season. By the way, plus 1,200 right now, most sites, according to Betting Pros, for Jalen Hurts MVP. Go put your money down. I already did. Just from Uncle Joe to everybody else out there. When you're looking too at I know the FFPC ADP out there too. What's so fascinating about that too is Lamar is going as the 34th guy off the board. Mahomes is the 20th. So if you wait, about 14, 15 picks, you can get Lamar. So if you think that Lamar can be that S-tier quarterback, you're getting a potential huge win there. Then again, the FFPC Fantasy Pros Championship is out there right now. You could sign up today at fantasypros.com/championship. And use that promo code FantasyPros. Don't forget when you do, so you get that $25 discount because somebody's going to win $1 million in that contest. So go check it out, fantasypros.com/championship, and sign up with that promo code FantasyPros. Now, looking at this next tier here as we go down from the ECR, the A tier is Lamar Jackson, who we've just talked about. Joe Burrow slides in at 5, great spot. Justin Fields at 6, Justin Herbert at 7, and then Trevor Lawrence at 8. He finishes QB8 last year. People are ranking him as QB8 consensus like now. Justin Fields right now, for you, Derek Brown, you've got him as the top of the A tier. Obviously, the rushing has a lot to do with it. What's so fascinating is Billy's got him all the way down in the B tier. It's not so much super far away in terms of rank, but in terms of tier, I think it's significant. So I want to talk about this. So first, let's get the positive Pete perspective from Derek about Justin Fields, because you've got him all the way up there at A. And honestly, I can't imagine it not being close to this, because that run that he was on was so good. DJ Moore is capable. Even if they just up the volume in a normal way as just progression of development of a young quarterback, there's every reason to believe that he could return that sort of a ranking. So let's talk about it.
Yeah, I mean, this is a lot of parts and pieces to Justin Fields. I mean, we could all talk about the rushing, and that gives him league-winning upside, like QB1 overall type of upside, because we saw it last year, guys. Like in weeks 7 through 11, whenever after Chicago said, okay, we're going to utilize your legs, you're really good, and we're going to use this part of your game. Week 7 through 11, Justin Fields was the QB1 in fantasy points per game. Mm-hmm. Then he goes out, he gets hurt in week 12 with a separated shoulder. He comes back, and he was running, but he wasn't the same type of player. Even if you zoom this out to like week 7 through 16 and include like after injuries and things like that, QB3 in fantasy points per game. And the big part, and you hit on this, Joe, is like, I think Justin Fields takes another step forward as a passer this season. We could talk about the accumulation of weapons, Chase Claypool being in the offense for a full season, Darnell Mooney still there, DJ Moore, and other ancillary pieces like them adding Robert Tonyan as a guy that they can run 12 personnel, giving them different looks for the defenses. And I want to push back against everybody out there slinging terrible, horrible, crap narratives, because this happens every freaking year, and I get so freaking sick of it. It happened to Jalen Hurts. It happened to Lamar Jackson beforehand. And damn it, I'm tired of hearing it, man. Justin Fields, if you don't see that he took a step forward as a passer last year, I'm going to straight up say it. You're looking at the wrong details. Week 7 through 16, amongst all quarterbacks with at least 80 dropbacks, he was 8th in adjusted completion rate. He was 12th in big time throw rate and 13th in passer rating. And if those numbers don't stand out and say, yes, this young man already took a step forward with crap weapons around him.
Oh, I think
and
it was
now we
crap.
added.
I think it was even
it's
lower.
terrible. It's terrible. And now they added to this depth chart. He already took that step forward. So don't come at me and say, oh, well, I have questions about him as a passer. If you do, you're looking at the wrong stuff.
Well, if you have questions of him as a passer, I'm guessing you never watched him play a game at Ohio State because he was pretty good there. Billy, I know you're sitting there waiting with the big bucket of cold water here. So let's pour it on D-Bro and let's look at the other perspective, because obviously you see some downside. Maybe you don't see him making this progress year over year that maybe Derek does.
No, I think
Come on, Wolverine, give me your beast mode. I need it.
I think we'll see progress, but I think Derek actually made the case for me when he cherry picked the 80 attempts in 4 games, because he had to set a threshold that low in order for it to qualify. And when we have the amount of attempts,
Well, no, that was week 7 through 16, bub. That wasn't just the 4 weeks.
Okay, but still, the 4 weeks we're talking about. In 4 weeks, he only had 90 attempts. All right, and so this is where it breaks down to me is the pass volume, and so Fields is going to have to be relying on his legs in order to return value. I agree. He has seen some positive trends inside of the passing game in his first couple of years. I don't think it's enough to keep him inside the top of this tier or in the tier that D-Bro has him in right now. When we look at his expected pass rate, it came in at 469.3 for me on the algorithm, but I adjusted based on the efficiencies, based on the offensive weapons that they added. I gave him a 9% boost, which took them to 511. I'm sorry, wrong one. 517 pass attempts, which is far higher than what we've seen out of this offense. And that is 3rd in the league, only behind Tennessee and Atlanta, who I have lower than them in the pass attempts. So it's a simple math game for me. I just don't think that we're going to see enough attempts out of Justin Fields in order for him to give this return. If he does, we're going to see another career high in rushing. And at that point, every addition that this team has made, they still have Khalil Herbert. They went out and got Foreman. They drafted Roschon Johnson. So when we look at the moves the team has made in the offseason, it signals to me that they want to run the ball still. That maybe means they want to run less with Justin Fields because they had 2 bruising backs who are going to be able to move the chains and come in during short yardage on the goal lines. They added DJ Moore, which also signals that they want to run less because they want to throw more. So to D-Bro's point, everything he mentioned in the passing game is accurate. I think that we're going to see some nice strides from Justin Fields. I just don't think it's enough to get him into this next echelon of tiers.
That's fair. That is very fair. That's why I like, in terms of playing the quarterback game this year, my strategy is let that first one in single quarterbacks go off the board. Have your list ready, because the tiers are very important. And I think if you get Fields late or if you have Fields or Lamar as 5th or 6th guy, you've done very well, because you still have the upside of somebody who could finish in the top 3, and you're still far and away above the rest of the field at QB1. So to me, it's like that little sweet spot in there where you see Mahomes go off, or whoever the number 1 guy is in that league, and then you just watch closely and try to just get in before they're all gone. When you're looking at the rest of this grouping too, now, ironically, when we're in this A tier here for you, Derek Brown, you've got Fields, Herbert, Trevor Lawrence, Joe Burrow, all in there. Same thing here with you, Billy. You've got Justin Herbert, Joe Burrow, Lamar. You've got Fields as your B tier along with Trevor Lawrence. So same general ranking, you've just tiered them differently, which is very fair and understandably so. You've also got Dak Prescott as your B tier guy also, who's right after Trevor Lawrence. Now, Dak is all the way at QB9. He's the beginning of that next tier we're going to talk about here, which is that B tier. So let's talk about Dak Prescott, because last year the interceptions were a problem. Let's not pretend like they weren't. But you still seem to have a confidence here in terms of your ranking. Why?
Yeah, again, it's just another really tight-knit projection. I mean, we have Dak Prescott, Trevor Lawrence, Deshaun Watson. I have Russell Wilson close to this area as well, all within like 10 fantasy points. So again, it's just very tight. When it comes to Dak Prescott, again, I look at the moves that the team has made. They have not gone out and signed another running back yet. They released Ezekiel Elliott. They have Tony Pollard. They went out and got Deuce Vaughn in the draft. So they got Brandon Cooks in the offseason. They did not replace Dalton Schultz with any veteran. They went out and got 2 rookies. So for me, it signals that they're going to rely heavily on CeeDee Lamb. They're going to rely heavily on Brandon Cooks in the passing game. We still have Michael Gallup now, who I think would be a better wide receiver 3 on the team than a wide receiver 2. Tony Pollard has the ability to be very electric in the passing game as well. And so when I look at these additions, I don't see a name like Leonard Fournette that's going to come in and hand the ball off 200 times, right? I don't see a name like Ezekiel Elliott, who could have potentially re-signed and got another 200 plus carries on this offense. So to me, again, the signals of the offense and what they've made from a coaching perspective and a GM perspective signal that they want Dak Prescott to throw the ball. We know that, he only played 12 games last year. He still had nearly 400 attempts. Right. In 2021, when he played 16 games, he had nearly 600 attempts with 4,400 yards. So I like the way this offense is trending. I think that we could potentially see them as a fairly pass-heavy team in 2023, which has kind of gone against what they have done in years past. And with that transition into kind of a new system, because Kellen Moore is gone as well, I think that it is going to benefit Dak Prescott and CeeDee Lamb.
What's so interesting is you make a really good case for that trajectory, and based in a lot of reality of what you saw last year, maybe you can clean up some of the mistakes. But Derek, you don't see any of this because you don't even have him as a QB1. You've got him as the 17th quarterback. So not only a whole other tier, but not even as a QB1. Mm-hmm. So Billy makes a great case for all the volume there in Dallas potentially, and the structure of this offense that probably isn't going to be nearly as run heavy as they might have been even in the past. So what are you not seeing here when it comes to Dak Prescott being a great fantasy option in 2023?
So what outside of my concerns, and I'll get to those about McCarthy here in a second, but what Billy's talked about, for me, this tier, and this is my 4th tier of quarterbacks up on the site, if you're looking at my ranks on FantasyPros.com, is that there are just guys that I feel this it's a long tier from QB 13 to QB 18. I've got guys sandwiched in there. And for me, there are quarterbacks that I like their projection or I like their outlook more than Dak. It's not that I hate Dak. And I know people, again, when people are utilizing ranks and we're utilizing tiers, what I want people to also, and this again, like harkens back to why I have Lamar at QB2. I want you to be above consensus on the QB4 on most different sites. So you are going to get more Lamar in your drafts. Like Billy brought up real fast, Russell Wilson. I've got him, and me and Billy are holding hands here, baby.
Yeah,
we're QB 13 together. And so, like, I like the projection of Russell Wilson, Tua, Deshaun Watson. I put Dak Prescott, like, I bounce back and forth between him and Jared Goff really close. And people might say, ew, gross. But Jared Goff had a lot of ceiling weeks whenever he had skill players around him, which walking into this year, he's going to. And I have concerns about Mike McCarthy. And this is not so much from a passing rate standpoint, because we can go back and parse through all of the Aaron Rodgers years and talk about, okay, well, they passed a good bit. They were high in attempts. There's a lot of context to be had for those seasons. But what gives me pause about Mike McCarthy is outside of the Aaron Rodgers boost in passing rate, which I don't know if it necessarily is a 1-for-1 with him and Dak Prescott. But what gives me a lot of concerns is if you look at their neutral script pace, the final 3 seasons when McCarthy had his hands on the controls, they were 20th, 25th, and 19th in neutral script pace. That worries me because while the passing rates might not be a big departure from Kellen Moore, the play volume and how fast this offense runs, and McCarthy's already talked about it. Why are we going to push the pace and wear out our defense and try to score more points and stuff like that? So he's already kind of alluded to this, as well as Dak Prescott's been one of the best play action passers in the NFL over multiple seasons. Kellen Moore used a lot of play action. Dak Prescott basically lived in a 25 to 28% per dropback play action rate. You look at McCarthy and what he's done, and again, maybe some of that is Rodgers, that drops to 16 to 20%. So if Dak Prescott, whenever his offensive, like what he feels comfortable in, is a lot of play action and he's really good at it, if some more of that goes away with McCarthy, then I've got concerns both from a play volume perspective and an efficiency perspective.
Let's continue through this tier here, because in the B tier, you've got Dak at 9, then Deshaun Watson at 10, which I think is a very fair ranking for Deshaun Watson, because the upside there for his top 5, and certainly the downside is pretty much everything you saw in the month of December in 2022.
Mm-hmm.
Tua Tagovailoa at 11, Daniel Jones at 12, Kirk Cousins at 13, then you've got Geno at 14, Aaron Rodgers at 15, and Jared Goff, who you're just mentioning, at 16. This does feel kind of like this clump. And I think this is what Derek was alluding to, or saying, you know, you could go back and forth and you can leapfrog certain guys here, but they're all kind of very close in terms of like relative position value, let's say. There's mere percentage points probably separating a lot of these guys in terms of who is better than the fantasy league average QB1. Deshaun Watson, I think, is the outlier, because Deshaun Watson's that guy that we've seen have bigger seasons than where he's being ranked. So that's an interesting one to boot. But what I want to talk about here is somebody that is in this tier for you, Derek Brown, which is Anthony Richardson. Now, you have him in this B tier. Anthony Richardson is towards the tail end of the C tier for you, Billy. Now, I know everyone's really excited about Anthony Richardson. I get that. And I understand we saw last year, you know, with Justin Fields being an incredible QB1 guy for a long period of time because of the rushing ability. Anthony Richardson is still very raw. Anthony Richardson is still a little bit inexperienced. So talk to me about the conservativeness of this ranking that you've got so far in Richardson.
Yeah, it just breaks down to him being a raw talent. And I think he's an exceptional athlete. And in order for him to hit the tier in which Debro has him in, he's going to need to have a outstanding year on the ground. I think that he will need to take time to adjust the NFL speed. I think we already saw him in college, who he was not, you know, an accurate passer in college. I think that we come into the NFL, we're going to see that being even worse. And I think that there's going to be a steep learning curve for him. I do definitely think that they will design running plays for him, which will prop up his fantasy stats. And I'm not entirely certain that he's going to actually start the entire year, because I do think he's going to have a rocky start. And so they went out and got Gardner Minshew, who has, you know, opposite game of him, is proven to be a pocket passer. And when he's given the option, has performed, you know, I'd say fairly well in his career. And I think that we will actually see them compete for the starting role during this offseason. And so I definitely think that Anthony Richardson has a ceiling. And I think that ceiling could be, you know, something like Justin Fields we saw last year if it is 100% designed on the ground. But I don't think that's the direction that this offense is going to go, because they still have a running back by the name of Jonathan Taylor on the team, who is going to be, you know, utilized 58-60% of the time on the ground for the rush share. And so when we look at that, we have to consider the downside now of Anthony Richardson and the projections of his rushing attempts. And so everything considered, I like the talent. I just have some concerns. I think that I'm probably one of the lower analysts on Anthony Richardson, just because I have a more conservative approach when it comes to rookie quarterbacks in the NFL, especially those that have shown inaccuracy. And so I'm just hesitant to place him any higher than this, just because we have a lot of proven players ahead of him, whether it be in the touchdown department, whether it be accuracy, whether it be with their legs or a combination, or just have a better supporting cast. And so there's, again, a tightly knit group here, but I think Anthony Richardson falls short of the rest.
Derek, I know sometimes you do this, which is you like to make a statement about a ranking. Is the statement you're making here, correct me if I'm wrong, in a single quarterback league, go be aggressive on Anthony Richardson, because the rest of that tier is a big clump, and whether it be Cousins or Rodgers or Goff, wherever you end up with, it's better to have that other guy, that Anthony Richardson, on your bench or on your roster for the pure upside of what if everything happens right and everything clicks right away and magic happens, because the insurance policies, there's just really no big difference or separator between that clump of guys in that tier. Is that fair for me to say?
Yeah. I think it's twofold for me, Joe. It's exactly what you're talking about, because if Richardson doesn't work out, you can go find the Jared Goffs, the Matthew Staffords of the world, maybe even Russell Wilson sitting on the waiver wire. That's not going to be hard in 1 QB leagues. But the other side of Anthony Richardson, and I get Billy's hesitation on this. If Anthony Richardson, and the other projection that I have for him is, I think he plays all the games. If he starts all the games, he's going to be a QB1 in fantasy based off of his rushing. I mean, we can go back and we can parse through like lots of guys over the last few years of where their rushing has covered up in fantasy for a lot of other
Josh
hiccups.
Allen's rookie year into Lamar, into Justin Fields, into Daniel Jones.
Jalen Hurts was QB6 in 2021. And
how about Daniel Jones last year? I mean, that wasn't exactly the prettiest season in terms of passer. And it's so funny to me because everybody wants to ding some other guys. Meanwhile, there's Daniel Jones. And everybody seems to be in love with him. And I'm thinking to myself, well, and granted, fair enough, he did not have the greatest supporting cast, but, he threw for barely over 3,000 yards last year in that offense. So it's just kind of funny to me where, at the end of the day, the rushing does matter so much, and it doesn't matter how pretty it all is. It matters what the points are.
The problem is that you're paying for the price already baked in. I mean, he's going as quarterback.
For Richardson, you mean?
Yeah, for Richardson. Yeah. He's going as quarterback 10 inside the Fantasy Pros contest at FFPC. I mean, he's only going
because the ECR, Billy, he's at 18. So what a drastic difference that is. But do you think that's basically because of
it's because they're playing for $1 million? They're playing for $1 million, right? So you're shooting for that 1% upside. And so if I'm in a draft, though, like if I'm playing a tournament like the Fantasy Pros contest at FFPC, then yes, great. You're going to want to take some swings for the fence in hopes of that 1% outcome. But when he's going 20 picks later than Deshaun Watson, who has just as much upside, yet proven, last year he didn't look the greatest down the stretch. But then you're going ahead of Dak Prescott, ahead of Tua, who has the weapons as well. All I'm saying is that at cost and ADP, if we're going to bake in the cost now of this discussion, we're already drafting him at or near his ceiling. I mean, there's only now 9 spots he can go higher. And now you're talking about the likes of Justin Fields, who we just talked about, Lamar Jackson, who we just discussed. We're talking about Justin Herbert, who's going to have the most pass attempts in the NFL potentially. We have Joe Burrow, Jalen Hurts, Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen. There's not a lot of wiggle room when you bake in this ADP and cost. And so ECR versus where we have him, great discussion. ADP, though, I think he's already being drafted at the ceiling.
It's a fascinating conversation. And this is why you run drafts. This is why you go out there and you use things like the Draft Wizard and you run as many mocks as you possibly can. That way you start to get a sense of where the value is on the board at these positions that we've been talking about in these big discussions on these ranks and tiers, because I get the case of being aggressive on Anthony Richardson. I don't buy the concept of taking him in an overall ADP where it's going to hinder you greatly in a single quarterback league. I think there's a line that Billy's pointing to that makes a ton of sense between risk and reward. And in the big tournaments, when you're playing for $1 million or a Scott Fishbowl or things like that, I get it. I understand that. And that's, as we continue to, develop things with the Draft Wizard, we're working on so many more tools so you can help you with these tight end premium drafts and help you with all these things going on. So if you haven't, make sure you download the Draft Wizard app and start mock drafting today. We've been using it. We got a big draft show coming up in a couple weeks. It's going to be myself and Erickson, Debro. I don't know where he's going. He's going on vacation for a couple of days. I don't know where he's going. But Marcus Grant's going to join us. Jamie Eisenberg's going to be drafting with the stars. It's going to be amazing. I can't wait for that show. We've also got some interesting guys in this next tier too, because once you get into this grouping, so we've done S, A, B, and C. Russell Wilson, as you guys said, you guys are in lockstep about. Then Anthony Richardson at 18, then Stafford, Derek Carr at 20, Jordan Love at 21, Kyler Murray at 22, Kenny Pickett at 23, and Bryce Young at 24. The Kyler Murray one still at 22, which is, again, kind of where I feel like, fine, you want to throw a dart in a super flex league as your third quarterback, I get it. I'm still concerned he doesn't end up playing much at all next year, or should I say this season. Kyler Murray is in your C tier. Derek, you have him in the D tier. Looking at the way this roster's built, it just feels like, I don't want to say he's a waste of a pick, Derek, but it's starting to feel like you are really throwing a dart hoping for not only everything to go right with the recovery, but everything to go good enough with the Cardinals that they're even going to risk putting him out there for any significant fantasy time. That's my big concern. What do you think about Kyler Murray here in the ranking overall?
I've got him buried, QB 22. And it comes down to that risk is not worth the reward. You're asking, Billy's talking about 1% outcomes. The chances of Kyler Murray playing the entire season and smashing and running and showing no problems with the ACL. Oh, and he's got to learn a new offense. Oh, and this offensive coordinator, we don't know what kind of offensive scheme they're going to run. That guy's unproven as well. So how many different parts or pieces are we sitting here like, okay, that has to go right, that, and that, and that, and that, and that. And no, I'm not doing all that. We just talked about all these quarterbacks up and down the board that I'm willing to embrace the risk, the floor and ceiling combos that are not named Kyler Murray. So I'm going to bury him in rankings, and I'm totally fine if people follow the ranks and they don't get any Kyler Murray. Cool. Sounds good. When he doesn't play any of the games, you're going to be like, yee, so glad I didn't draft Kyler Murray.
Well, it just seems like a waste. And in Superflex with Billy, I'm sure you can attest to this too. In Superflex, there is such a drop off. After you get past the clump, it gets a little dark out in the streets, and you're starting to look out there and you're going, man, I don't really see a lot of these situations working out. You got a lot of youth, a lot of second year players, a lot of, retread kind of guys. So you're in a weird place there. So to me, at least take a guy that is going to be there for 10, 12 weeks, as opposed to somebody who's not. And this is why I kind of go back, and I want to backtrack a second because I want to ask you about Deshaun Watson again, because when we're looking for value, I know you've got Deshaun Watson as a B tier quarterback. Derek's got him as the C tier quarterback. As we go through these Richardson conversations, as we go through these Fields conversations, Lamar, there's a guy sitting there at 10, whether you're in single quarterback leagues or in Superflex formats, where Deshaun Watson, how good the potential for him is going to be in fantasy because you've seen it multiple times. So do you see him getting closer to the Deshaun Watson of the Houston Texans age, or are we possibly in this loop, Billy, where we're going to see a guy who never quite gets it back?
No, I'm going to be honest with you. I moved him between these two tiers probably 3 times before I emailed you that I was done punching these in.
My man.
But doesn't that think about what that says? Billy, think about what that says. Now, I've got him, I think I've had him at 10, just period. Like I justify the other guys ahead of him because of the safety level and the performance level. But then, exactly what you said, that is, I think, speaks volumes, because this is coming from the guy who is almost better than anybody else at ranking quarterbacks. And you're like, yeah, I can't figure out what to do with Deshaun Watson. So nobody should feel bad about not understanding the value right now. So I think you're basically putting a lot of our audience, in a place where they can breathe and say, okay, I'm not alone.
Yeah, I have a lot of doubts. I think I lean more on the doubt side of Deshaun Watson than I do of him ever regaining form, especially when you look at the film last year. I understand he hadn't played football since 2020. He was rusty. He now gets an entire offseason with the offense. He gets to build that chemistry, the rapport, gets another year inside the system, learning the playbook. So there's a lot to say that he's going to be in an upwards trajectory. That being said, he didn't look like himself last year. And I don't know if it was just rust or if it was because he had so much time off. He was in a new system with a new coach, with a new team, new division, everything, you name it, right? There was a lot against him in the odds. And so I still think, though, that the way he played down the stretch, if we see any of that again in 2023, that it's safe to say that he is going to be inside of that C tier. And I think, though, if we do see him regain form, and he doesn't even need to be full form, it could be 80%. If he is 80% of that form, then I think that it's safe to say that we can see him at the backside of that B tier. So he has one of the largest kind of range of outcomes of all the quarterbacks inside the league this year. And I do think that he has the potential to become, a top 7-5 quarterback again. I just don't like the chances of it happening.
Range of outcomes is Derek Brown's middle name. So Debro, let's talk about Deshaun Watson, because again, you've got him lower than consensus. So you're obviously more on the negative side as well.
I am. I mean, I just... And this all goes back to that same grouping of guys. I feel so much better about drafting a Kirk Cousins and Anthony Richardson for the rushing upside, Russell Wilson, all these different guys. Hell, even I'll give y'all a good scenario here. Why draft Deshaun Watson and embrace that risk when you could just get Geno Smith later? And similar. If Deshaun Watson doesn't bounce back to the top 5, then you're talking about his range is more like Billy was talking about. QB7, QB8, low end QB1. Didn't we just see that out of Geno Smith, and I don't have to pay for it last year? Outside
Derek,
of embracing the risk of Deshaun Watson? Why?
Derek, I'd venture to say you can get Geno and Anthony Richardson in most casual drafts.
Yep.
Like you could probably do both of that, and I think that's kind of the moment we're coming to right now. There's a couple of guys I want to talk about too as we kind of round out these top 40 guys, because after that tier where we just mentioned it, Kenny Pickett and Bryce Young at 24, that next tier's got Jimmy G, CJ Stroud, Mac Jones, Trey Lance. You've got Tannehill, Sam Howell, Desmond Ridder, Purdy, Mayfield, Will Levis, which is basically, this is the group of nobody knows what to think about. There's guys who are, coming off down years like Mac Jones. There's guys coming off injuries like Brock Purdy. There's, rookies like CJ Stroud. And it's so wide open here. I want to highlight a few of these guys in this tier though, because Sam Howell, Billy, you've got in the D tier. Derek's got him in the F tier. So you've got him significantly higher than Derek has him. What do you think Sam Howell's potential is? Because you're getting a lot of positive reports out of Washington, but again, you have to take those with a grain of salt because they always want to talk positive in the offseason about everything. Of course, the sky isn't falling. Everything is great. So what are you buying into when it comes to Sam Howell potentially in 23?
For me, it's the weapons, right? He has Jahan Dotson. He has Terry McLaurin. He's got Curtis Samuel. He's got Gibson, who he can use as an outlet in the passing game as well behind the line of scrimmage. Brian Robinson, of course, if all else fails, they can just hand him the ball off 20 times for 40 yards. But we have... sorry.
Brian Robinson just catches strays here. It's so crazy. God, Lord.
You tell I'm not crazy about Brian Robinson. I think overall, I really like...
That's probably the worst phrase to use, too, about Brian Robinson. Just want to point that out. Because, somebody in the YouTube comments is going to say that. So it's not what he meant. Get over it, everybody. Sometimes people say things.
It breaks down, like I said, it breaks down to the weapons. I like his new offensive coordinator, Eric Bieniemy, coming over from Kansas City. I think they're going to get creative with him in the playbook and the scheme. And I think they're just going to let him air the ball out because at the end of the day, if all else fails, they're going to be in at least a position to potentially draft a quarterback next year, and they're going to give him the opportunity to succeed. I do think that Brissett sees the field at some point this season, so I don't have Sam Howell projected for an entire 16 games or 17 games. I have him projected for 13. And that number, as we see more camp news, it is subject to change in the projections. But I do think that we at least have some upside for Howell based upon the weapons.
I can see myself in a lot of Superflex leagues as a third quarterback stash taking Jacoby Brissett. I saw what he did last year and what a great leader he was. And I feel like if you gave him all the weapons and he had this ability, if Sam Howell does not work out in September, you might see a whole lot of Jacoby Brissett. And then to what Billy's point is, maybe next year you go take a quarterback in the draft. Desmond Ridder, another guy in this tier. Now, I know, it's hard to evaluate him based on what you saw last year. But Derek, for you, when you're looking at Desmond Ridder, you speak about weapons. Well, this guy's got a trio of weapons that is about as good as it gets in terms of young players. So can that be enough to help facilitate him as a low-end QB2?
No. I want nothing to do with Desmond Ridder. I think you're looking at a similar situation. We just talked about Sam Howell and Jacoby Brissett. Desmond Ridder goes out there and he just absolutely burns it down, sucks in the first 3 weeks. Here comes the Taylor Heineke show, baby. And based off of what we saw from Desmond Ridder last year, what says that he's going to be a good quarterback? Like, he ran some in college. He only had one game with at least 10 rushing yards. Okay, that's not great. You look at all his passing stats. He was outside the top 40 when he was a starter, and basically everything, yards per attempt, adjusted completion rate, all these different types of things. I think Taylor Heineke is the exact same bet of Jacoby Brissett, just different situation. And I want nothing to do with Desmond Ridder. If you look at my ranks on the site, I have him totally buried because I don't see the upside. It's like, at the best, you're hoping for a QB2. At worst, he doesn't have a job.
If QB gets away from him in Superflex, this is an interesting conversation of the Brissetts and the Heinekes of the world, because we keep looking at these situations and them being really tenuous. So why pay a price for these guys that you really have no confidence in or clarity in when you could take some of these backups that you've actually seen them play the NFL at a decent enough level that they could be second quarterbacks or bye week quarterbacks for you? Maybe that's the approach we should start to seriously consider. There's one more thing we have to talk about, and there's nobody better than Mr. 49er himself, Billy Muzio, to talk about it, is the 49er quarterback situation. Because you want to talk about not being able to rank people, I got nothing here. Sam Darnold's in this mix now. You've got Brock Purdy, Billy. You've basically got his poster hanging above your bed, it feels like, because you've got him as a C-ranked quarterback. I know he was good last year in the system. You've got Trey Lance as a D-ranked quarterback. Debro ain't having it. He's got both in the F tier for himself. So, Billy, what do we do here with the 49ers quarterback situation? I know it's early. I know we're still waiting on more clarity and news, but right now we don't have anybody. So what's our approach, or what do you see this being when we get to September?
So I said in December that Brock Purdy was going to be the starter for the Niners, and I still stand by that. I think the only thing stopping it right now, of course, is the injury. We're looking like all of the best case scenarios for Brock Purdy is happening. He had a successful surgery. He's ahead of the timeline. He's going to start resuming throwing after the 12 weeks. And so we're seeing all of those milestones be hit right now, and if not ahead of schedule. As of late, they're saying that he is slated to start week 1 if he remains on the schedule. And we look at what he did last year. And this is, okay, you can set aside my Niner biases because I am a Niner fan. But when we look at the overall metrics and we take a look at the statistics, he had that 6-game stretch where he threw for a total of 1,200 yards, 68% completion rate. He averaged 201 yards a game, which is not a lot, but he also threw 13 passes and only had 4 interceptions during that time, where he had a quarterback rating of
13 passing touchdowns, you mean?
Correct. Thank you. He had a passer rating of 102.2. And so I like what I saw out of him. I thought he was impressive in managing the West Coast offense. And when you look at the Niners, that's all they needed. They didn't need someone to go out and throw Patrick Mahomes bombs down the field 50, 60 yards. They needed somebody who was just going to get their playmakers the ball, somebody to get the ball into Christian McCaffrey's hands, someone to get the ball into Debo's hands, someone to get the ball to Ayuk, somebody to get the ball into Kittle. They have so many weapons, and their strength on all of these guys is yards after the catch. And so when you look at what Purdy did, he was able to just get the ball out. He was able to get to his second and his third read at times. And I liked what we saw from that. So he actually finished number 8 in the league in completion percentage. Again, this is over 250 snaps, so I cherry picked this one just like Debro did earlier. But this places him.
Everybody gets one.
Everybody gets one. This places him among the most elite quarterbacks in the league in this category, which last year was Geno Smith at 69.8%, Joe Burrow 68.5%, Justin Herbert 68.2%, and then we saw Patrick Mahomes in that list as well. He dominated touchdown rate at 7.6%. He led all of the qualified quarterbacks in that rate. He actually finished 1.3 points ahead of Patrick Mahomes. He finished 1.5 points ahead of Josh Allen. He finished almost 2 full points ahead of Joe Burrow, and he finished almost 2 full points ahead of Dak Prescott. He was also very impressive under pressure in the red zone. He actually finished as the number 2 most accurate quarterback in the red zone last year. And I talked about the passer rating. He was number 7 in true passer rating with 94.81. So I think the West Coast offense suits him well. He's a system quarterback. I've heard people say that left and right. Great. You know who else was a system quarterback? Was Joe Montana.
Okay.
When he led the revolutionary West Coast offense.
West Coast offense, yeah.
And that's what we're still seeing today. And so I'm not saying that Brock Purdy is Joe Montana, but what I'm saying is that he can run the West Coast offense, and that's all the Niners need.
Derek Brown, now for what it's worth, even though you have them both in the F tier, you still have Purdy above Lance. So that was a mountain of receipts that Billy Muzio brought for Brock Purdy. So
you want to see the tattoo?
No, I think we're good. We're good. It's enough. If you had one, if you really had one,
we need it.
If you really had one, I would want to see it. But I know you don't.
Full back piece, Purdy going.
At the end, hey, if there's a 49ers Super Bowl, maybe Billy Muzio shows up next year with one. But Debro, again, you don't have to be a great quarterback. You have to be the right quarterback sometimes in a great place. That's what Brock Purdy felt like last year for that run. The question is, does the league make enough adjustments where that becomes a problem for him?
Well, I think Billy highlighted something that I wanted to hit on with Purdy, and all I heard was a great touchdown percentage. And when Billy's rolling through this, all I hear in my head is regression. Like,
sure.
The touchdown rate was fantastic. I just have questions about, can he replicate that? And Billy talked about him not averaging a whole lot as far as through the air. Yeah, well, if the passing volume, I don't think they're going to become like a high-flying team, is not there. If the yardage is not there, if the touchdowns regress, then you're looking at Brock Purdy even at his best. And I'm not going to take anything away from him efficiency-wise, because you look at all that stuff that Billy outlined, it is all absolutely true. He was efficient as all get out. But the problem is if the touchdowns go away, the yardage doesn't compensate, he's not going to run at all. And even at his very best, guys, he was QB 14 in fantasy points per game during that stretch. Even if you zoom down and put that against full season stats, it's still QB 13. And this is talking about with probably an unsustainable touchdown rate. So he's producing like a QB 2, even at what may be his ceiling. I can go get QB2 production with an actual ceiling on top of that at multiple points of the draft. And again, it's the health. It's the, if he doesn't start the season, if it's Darnold under center and Darnold plays well through 3 or 4 games, does he stay the quarterback? If Lance stays the quarterback.
That's the most terrifying thing, is because theoretically Sam Darnold is, is the veteran
he's
here and all that
make
stuff.
A start. He could.
And he's never been in a situation arguably that good. And
ever.
Just watch the show. It's going to be great. But this was a great show. Billy, tremendous work. Thanks for coming in and joining us today. Again, follow him on the Twitter machine and check out his great work over at playerprofiler.com. You can follow him at FF Muzio on the Twitter machine, and go and run some mock drafts on the Draft Wizard. Download it. It's free. If you're premium, you get all the extra bells and whistles. Get ready for the Fantasy Pros Championship. Again, fantasypros.com/championship, that FFPC event. We're giving away year-long subscriptions to Betting Pros Premium, to Fantasy Pros Premium. Somebody's going to win $1 million, just $6 million in prizes, and you get $25 off your entry if you use that promo code FantasyPros at fantasypros.com/championship. So come be a part of that. And don't forget to click the bell and, of course, subscribe to Fantasy Pros YouTube channel as well. Great conversation, guys. We could do this all day, but eventually, we have other things we have to do with our lives. I'm not so sure, but I want to do this all day. Hopefully you enjoyed it. We want to hear from you in the comments. Drop them below on the YouTube channel. That'll do it for us, but the story of the game goes on. For Derek and Billy, I'm Joey P. We'll see you next time, kids.